Hi, my name is Christian Garcia. Good evening, and I will be talking about the legalization of selling organs, and I will be refuting Araceli Posado's proposition that the sale of organs would resolve a significant health problem in the United States. I agree with this. However, the fact is she does not take into consideration the possible consequences of creating a market for organs. So through that, I will be disputing how organ donation does not have the donor's interest in mind other than a certain reward of cash. It doesn't really talk about the health that the organ donor could face when they undergo the organ donation surgery. The market could also lead to faulty organs being bought and transplanted into those that need them. So that doesn't have the recipient, the organ recipient's needs in mind. And finally, the organ market could attract a narrow crowd, meaning like demographic-wise, so like a certain type of people that will be mainly the ones donating their organs. So first, I would like to talk about the organ donation and how it does not have the donor's interest in mind. This comes from an NPR article by Gretchen Kuda-Krohn. The first example, these are examples of like actual incidences that have happened through organ donation by the organ donor. So there is an example in which an organ donor, Vicky Young, states how she donated her kidney to a friend and 7 years later came down with stage 3 chronic kidney disease. Another example, this one's much more severe than the other one. In addition, another young mother died on a table in New York's Montefiore Medical Center after her aorta was accidentally severed during a surgery, also by the NPR article. So although these are two extreme cases, one of them is more rare death, obviously, it's still a dramatic risk that the donor must take in order to actually get this prize of money. In addition, I would like to include a study that took place in India. This was done by a couple of scientists and doctors. And in India, it is legal to sell your organs. So this is actually where it takes place as opposed to the United States where it currently does not take place, the legalization of selling organs. So this is from the study. Of participants, 50% complained of persistent back pain at the nephrectomy site, and 33% complained of a long-term back pain. Now these are inconveniences that the donor must face when they are undergoing this surgery. So since it is not necessary for them to do it and there is this prize money, then it's not really fair to them that they have to trade off between prize money or their health. And a final example is according to a transplant officials, 3 of every 10,000 kidney donors are expected to die as a result of donating, and 1 in 10 is expected to develop complications. The first one about the dying, the 3 in 10,000, that's not that big of a number, but considering that this is an optional thing, it is, it's a big issue. And then the one that's more reasonable is the 1 in 10 are expected to develop conditions, or complications, sorry. And, again, that's not necessary if the person does not have to do this organ donation. My second topic I would like to discuss is how the market could lead to faulty organs being transplanted and bought. The first example is that the transplant centers are increasingly willing to accept donors that are older, obese, or have high blood pressure. This is from an NPR article by a professor named Professor Ross of bioethics. And this is bad because it is claimed that high blood pressure is linked to kidney disease. So if we have people that are donating kidneys that have high blood pressure, the recipient can in turn also be affected by this in the future, and that's not in the recipient's well-being. In addition, poverty is associated with a high risk of kidney disease, and thus an exchange involving a very poor donor would not benefit either party. This is by Dr. Benjamin Hippen, a nephrologist. That's a person who does the process of the surgery in order to remove a kidney and place it into the recipient. This also relates to the next area I'm going to be talking about, which is my third area about the organ market, how it attracts a narrow crowd. So this is more of a demographic issue in the sense that donors are poor, with most living below the poverty line. Most are illiterate and in low-paid manual jobs. Their sole reason for donating, not born of altruism. Altruism is like basically doing something for the better of other people, but to pay off debt. So we have this issue which relates to the previous one in that if the impoverished are the ones most likely to donate their kidneys, then how is that going to affect someone who needs the kidney if it's going to be if it comes from someone who has a potential risk of having a poor kidney, or for that mean any organ. And it can be inferred also that these donors that are poor are doing this for money, so it's kind of unfair for the government to have involvement in making people have a trade-off between either their health or money that they have. So the government shouldn't really be allowed to affect that. In addition, another case, the study in India, this also relates because it's actually legalized to sell organs there. It says, a study in India, when asked a separate question about wanting to help a sick person with kidney disease, 95% of the participants said that this was not a major factor in the decision to sell. It's unfortunate that only 5 of them actually, included the idea that these people that they want to help someone live, but as we see here, it's the 95% said that that's not a major issue, so they want it to be for the money, which isn't good, because then we'll have the people that need the money, they'll be the ones only donating their kidneys and are at these potential health risks, which I described in the first argument. And in conclusion, I would like to say that it's important to keep in mind the study in India because it actually takes place there, and this would relate to the United States if we adopt an organ market. So it's important to include the consequences that would happen and could potentially happen. And I refuted that organ donation does not always have the organ donor's health in mind, and how a market could lead to faulty organ transplant in those that need them. And finally, the organ market could attract a narrow crowd. Thank you.
All right, well, if you concede the proposition before you get to any of your responses, then that's a bit of a problem. I think that what you're trying to do is turn this into a policy argument and suggest that the policy would have negative consequences and there are harmful outcomes as a result of this. If the advocate phrased it as a proposition of policy, then I think that's a legitimate argument. But if we're simply arguing over whether or not it would solve a problem, then your answer is that it would create a different problem is only relevant in limited context. I'm not sure it's relevant here. Unless you, for example, argued that the overall health issue would have to be judged and that in the long run, total health would be less positively affected, then maybe it applies there. But that doesn't really seem to be the direction that you're headed here. You preview your counterclaims. There's not a lot of discussion of the advocate's evidence and the lack of information that they used or how they made their inferences. You basically suggest that there are problems with the donation system. Although the first examples that you give seem to exist in our existing donation system, so they're really about current donors under the rules that don't allow sale. So why it would apply to the advocate's argument, I don't know. The argument about what happens in India, I think, is a little bit more specific and suggests that people who donate have a whole variety of potential problems, and that we've got risk of death. That's true, and we've got a risk of complications that's much higher. I thought that was interesting. By the way, if that's from the same study, you need to make sure that you indicate that because it wasn't quite clear what the source for those two numbers were. I do think that this would be a good place to maybe make that comparison. So for instance, if 50% of the donors now have continuing back pain and there are 100,000 donors, then that means there are 50,000 people with continuing back pain. How do we weigh that against the 50,000 people who got kidneys replaced or some other organ replaced? Because that's the argument that, if we're going to talk about on-balance health, would have to be looked at. And then, of course, you have the risk of death, but I'm sure that the advocate would say, well, there's a risk of death, there's a substantial risk of death, and maybe a higher risk of death if people don't get organs. So there's an interesting argument to be made here, but it would have to be, like I said, in a different context. On the second point, you talk about how the market would probably lead to specific kinds of people coming into that market. You mentioned older, obese, people with high blood pressure. Actually, I guess that's the third point that says that we're going to get all the poor people. And it's the second point that just talks about who the current donors are. if I was the advocate in this particular situation, I'd say, well, that's one of the problems. The only people that we can get to donate now are people who have these particular problems. If we were able to offer financial incentive, we'd be able to get other people who are much healthier to able to donate, because all of your information is based on the current donation system, unless again that evidence is specific to India, which I don't know that you identified that. On the third point, here's the thing that I thought was a little bit problematic. I think you've got a good argument that says that it would really draw a very particular crowd, but then you make a presupposition that this crowd has problem organs, and I don't think there was any demonstration of that the poor who would be drawn in because they're trying to get rid of their debt have lousy kidneys or something that's going to be problematic later on. That's a big inferential leap that you're making. And your statistic at the end, only 5% are thinking of donating for altruistic reasons, and 95% are doing it for the money. Well, again, that seems to suggest the validity of the advocate's point that says we would have a lot more organs because currently only 5% are willing to donate for altruistic reasons, and a lot more people would be donating if we were giving them money. And so I think that argument doesn't help you as much as you might think. All right, thank you.